Good morning, everyone. This is Coach Johnson. Hopefully, finding you doing well this Tuesday morning. And, hopefully you're staying healthy, safe, and avoiding, good old big bad COVID-19. Now, this has kind of been a start to throughout the course, we've been kind of just introducing you to a lot of the concepts and ideas and people that you're going to be hearing about throughout the course. And of course, we're going to be going into much more depth later on. But right now, we're going to talk about probably the biggest debate that still rages in psychology, which is nature versus nurture. Essentially, are you born with a certain thing? Like, are you born the way you are, or is it something that's raised in you, or is it, kind of more of a combination of the two?
We're born with a set of genes that never changes. And for generations, there has been debate over nature versus nurture, and whether genes or environment influence behavior more. What does determine our destiny? Is it in the genes? When we are conceived, two sets of genes are joined into one. From that moment, DNA determines certain characteristics. The color of our eyes, the texture of our hair, our gender, our sex. But science has only begun to explore the role genes play in human behavior.
Genes may very well determine how we behave in given situations.
UCLA immunologist Bill Clark says genes help control how we interpret our environment.
You're dealt a particular hand of neurotransmitters and neurotransmitter receptors. And again, together with other things, of course, in your biology and in your history, it's going to play out differently in different people.
There has to be some kind of innate circuitry in place that allows us to create culture and acquire culture and do the learning.
But they do not operate without some input.
What you choose to learn, how hard you try to learn, and what you do with what you learn, you do have some responsibility.
The ability to modify our behavior is what allows us to overcome genetic predisposition.
Different genes are turned on and off in different circumstances.
Those circumstances, though, may be very subtle.
We actually could fool people by pretending we were each other.
Consider identical twins born with the same DNA.
Same height, same weight, our whole lives.
Though raised alike, Nancy and Jana are quick to point out they're individuals.
Nancy was always very free-spirited, and I was the one that was a little bit more responsible.
Need a push?
No.
And how much does our upbringing matter?
Proper brain growth depends on lots of nurturing interactions in the early years of life.
Parents aren't the only aspect of the environment. There's also the surrounding culture.
Some believe the strongest social influences exist outside the home. Controversial author Judith Rich Harris says we get our genes from our parents, but are guided by our peers.
The children of immigrants don't resemble their parents in the language they speak and even in their culture. They resemble the people they grew up with.
A recent study backs this up. It found the greatest influence on whether teens drink or smoke is whether their friends do.
As long as you're within the normal range of parenting, how your child turns out is not up to you, it's up to the child.
Child psychiatrist Stanley Greenspan says this attitude can create irresponsible parenting.
Let's see you dance.
He says genes and environment are like a dance, working together to make us who we are.
That's it. Good.
And maybe the environment sets the constraints just as much as the genes do.
If you throw Einstein in a closet when he's a baby because he has some insane parent, he is not going to be smart. He's going to wind up like one of these tragic kids who gets found in a closet.
So whether it's parents, peers, or genetic predisposition, it seems our destiny is determined by a blend of factors.
Nature is a lock, and nurture has to provide the key for that lock.
Scientists continue to study the nature of DNA and how it reacts to environment. As they do, they gain better understanding of the diseases and behaviors that affect our lives.
Okay, so that gives you kind of a little background in the nature versus nurture debate, but that's just the biggest part of, that's just the major debate. But however, there are different groups that try to figure out how to, that helps you determine what side of the fence you're going to be on. Plus, there are a bunch of different approaches to psychology in general. So the first one is biological. This is where someone has shown, or they have shown, that certain parts of the brain are highly active when listening to music, or other parts that are active when solving math problems. So there are obviously things that are going on that are shaped by the nervous system, the brain, the hormones, the genes. So a biopsychologist might explain a person's tendency to be extroverted as caused by the genes inherited from their parents and genes' effects on the abundance of certain neurotransmitters in the brain. I know a lot of that sounded like Greek, but we'll go into more depth on all that stuff later. It is also one of the fastest growing fields in psychology because of all the latest discoveries about how the brain works, meaning the more we learn, the more people become interested in it, and the more we start to realize that maybe there's a lot to psychology that is biological. Then there's the evolutionary perspective, or Darwinian, okay? Now this looks for psychological traits that might be advantageous for survival, and these traits would be passed down from parents to the next generation. Kind of like, a polar bear passing down its white fur to its offspring because it helps them survive in the cold. And they might explain a person's tendency to be extroverted as a survival advantage. If a person is outgoing, they might make friends and allies. These connections can improve the individual's chances for survival, which increases the person's chances for passing this trait for extroversion down to his or her children. Then there's psychodynamic. This is the one that was founded by Sigmund Freud. And as we previously described, the unconscious mind is the driver here. These unconscious motives motivate our behavior. So obviously people who follow this believe to understand human thought and behavior, we must examine our unconscious mind through dream analysis, word association, and other techniques. Psychoanalytic psychologists might explain that an introverted person avoids social situations because of a repressed or forgotten memory of trauma in childhood that might be involving a social situation. Maybe they were publicly humiliated, maybe they were bullied, maybe it was something really embarrassing. But either way, they may not consciously remember it, but something happened that affects how they see or view something. And then there's behaviorism. Remember we talked about this guy yesterday, John B. Watson, John Behaviorist Watson. It's a way to remember. And this was the one that explains how human thoughts and behaviors are, reflected in the forms of conditioning. Basically, we see all behavior as a result of the environment. You think you have free will, but everything you do is a result of positive and negative reinforcement. So rewards and punishments. And this one, again, remember, focuses on observable behavior. So a behaviorist might explain a person's tendency to be extroverted in terms of reward and punishment. Was the person rewarded for being outgoing, or was the person punished for withdrawing from a situation and not interacting with others? A behaviorist would look for environmental conditions that cause an extroverted response in the person. Then there's cognitive, which emphasizes the ways in which people store, retrieve, and process how they see the world, how they react to events. So it's the way that people think. They are interested in discovering how people process information in domains ranging from decision-making and interpersonal attraction to intelligence testing and group problem solving. Cognitive psychologists attempt to determine how these components produce complex behaviors such as remembering a fact, naming an object, writing a word. And a cognitive psychologist might explain a person's tendency to be extroverted in terms of how he or she interprets social situations. So does the individual interpret others' offers for conversation as an important way to get to know someone, or as important for his or her life in some way? To a cognitive psychologist, an extroverted person sees the world in such a way that being outgoing just makes sense. And then there are humanists. So these are people that believe that we choose most of our behaviors, and these choices are guided by physiological, emotional, or spiritual needs. So basically, we have our own choices. We're always seeking fulfillment, and that these are informed by our culture, how we grew up, and our biology. So a humanistic psychologist might explain that an introverted person may choose to limit social contact with others because he or she finds that social needs are better satisfied by contact with a few close friends rather than a large group. This is not easily tested by the scientific method, so this is kind of a harder one to prove, whereas some of the other ones are a little bit easier. But some therapists use these ideas in aiding clients overcome obstacles in their life, so it does have its place. And then there's social cultural, okay? So this one describes how our thoughts vary from people living in other cultures. So how far apart do people in this culture usually stand when they have a conversation? How often do people touch each other while interacting? Well, obviously right now during the age of COVID, we're probably not talking to each other very much, but it is what it is at this point. So how much value does the culture place on being part of a group versus being an individual? I would say in the United States, we're very individualistic. Like we don't necessarily like being a part of a team. Whereas Asian cultures and other cultures probably will focus more on family dynamics or having like the overall well-being of the group instead. So your cultural norms would be important to a sociocultural psychologist in explaining a person's extroversion. Now, if you were to ask psychologists which of these perspectives they most agree with, they might say that each perspective has valid explanations depending upon the specific situation. And this is what we refer to as an eclectic, which claims that no one perspective has all the answers to the variety of human thoughts and behaviors because psychologists use various perspectives in their work depending upon which point of view works best. So basically, there's no one size fits all answer. It's kind of a mixture of all of the above. So I would probably say most psychologists fit into this category, though some of them may focus more on a specific type, but I think they all pretty much fall in this category. Okay, so we got a little bit of a game here that we're going to go through, and it's called Name That Psychological Approach. Okay? So this approach emphasizes internal conflicts, mostly unconscious, which cause anxiety. And if you guessed the psychoanalytic approach, you would be correct. Now, this one emphasizes individual potential for growth and stress and the individual choice and free will, or stresses all of these things. And that would be the humanistic approach. There's this one which emphasizes ways in which people receive, store, retrieve, and process information. So how do we, perceive the world around us? And that's the cognitive approach. And then there's this one which emphasizes the influence culture has on the way we think and act. And that, of course, is sociocultural. This one emphasizes learning, and especially each person's experience with rewards and punishment. So your reinforcements. And if by just saying that word, that should automatically tell you it's the behavioral approach. And then last, but most certainly not least, it's that the behavior and mental processes are largely shaped by the nervous system, your brain, your hormones, your genes, and this is the biological approach. So just take these, remember them. Now, just a heads up, we're going to be having our test soon, so hopefully you'll be ready for that. But anyway, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Okay, thank you.